Hey folks, it's Röckët Stähr here, and this is the first episode of a series I'm going to be doing called What's It Mean to You? And it's all about rock and roll and all things rock and roll related. So I'm going to start the first episode on the subject of rock and roll. Seems appropriate to me, so let's go. Why do you throw it all away? Alright, so what does rock and roll mean to me? Beyond just the music, which of course is what rock and roll actually is, music, and I'll get to all that in a moment. Beyond that, it's actually everything to me. It's an entire lifestyle. It's a culture. It's a way of dressing. It's a way of looking at the world. It's an attitude. It's the rebel spirit. It's a personal philosophy to a degree. I love the idea of the rock god. I love the leather. I love the denim. I love the lace. I love rock and roll and all of its excesses. I love its overt sexuality. I love the scantily clad women in the videos from the 80s. I love all the stories of the groupie culture from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, rock and roll is a euphemism for sex, right? Let's not beat around the bush. No pun intended. To me, rock and roll is a big middle finger, a big fuck you to a society that tells you to sit down, shut up, and conform. For me, rock and roll is the absolute height of the feeling of being alive. If any of you out there are Seinfeld fans, you might recall there was an episode where George Costanza talked about how much he loved velvet and that if it were socially acceptable, he'd drape himself in velvet. Well, that's how I feel about rock and roll. I want to drape myself in rock and roll. I want it in the clothes that I wear. I want it in posters on my walls. I want to be watching concerts or documentaries about rock and roll on TV. I want to be attending concerts. I want to consume it. I want to write it. I want to talk about it. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. I absolutely love rock and roll photography. I love rock and roll biographies, whether they're in book form or movie form, and whether they're authorized or unauthorized. I mean, yeah, it's probably a whole lot of bullshit in the unauthorized ones, but quite frankly, there's probably a lot of bullshit in the authorized ones as well, right? Just a lot of fun no matter how you slice it. When you think about certain bands, it's, to me, almost impossible to fathom that certain combinations of people happen to meet each other and happen to form the group that they did at that particular place in time and write the songs that they did and have the chemistry that they did. Every single aspect of some of those bands is just absolute perfection, and you would almost not believe that it could happen, except that it did. Now, when I say rock and roll, I'm really kind of talking about a wide swath of music, from metal to blues rock to early 60s girl groups to folk rock like Dylan and Cat Stevens, and I'm talking early 90s grunge, I'm talking early 70s glam rock, I'm talking LA 80s hard rock. I'm really talking about every aspect of it, mostly guitar driven, but not always. Some of it's piano driven, like Elton John, Billy Joel, love those guys. Personally, my home base with rock happens to be blues-based hard rock. I'm talking Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Van Halen. That shit just drips with sex. It has swing, it has swagger, it has a little bit of sleaze even. But like I said, I love and personally create a wide swath of what you could loosely call rock and roll. Metallica, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Megadeth, Kiss, Alice Cooper, Tom Petty, Fleetwood Mac, The Eagles, Boston, ELO, Lynyrd Skynyrd, T-Rex, Queen, Mott the Hoople, David Bowie, Slade, and just a whole shit ton of stuff in between. I love it when it's raw and underproduced and just punching you right in the face. I love the big bloated over the top stuff with heavy orchestrations or just really slick glossy production like Journey. I love the fact that within the framework of rock and roll music, you can be somebody who can barely play an instrument, who can barely carry a tune, and yet you can write and record a fantastic song and a fantastic record and go on to have a very successful career. And on the other side of that spectrum, you can be a virtuoso guitarist, you can be a multi-instrumentalist, you can be a singer with an absolutely fantastic wide-ranging voice like Freddie Mercury or Steve Perry from Journey or Rob Halford from Judas Priest. And at the end of the day, there's complete validity in what both of those types of artists do, and they're both on equal footing in the rock world. It's all just rock and fucking roll, man. Rock and roll is really the closest thing that the world has to real, honest-to-goodness magic. A great song recorded by a great band on a great record with amazing production that suits it just perfectly. I just am endlessly fascinated that that's even possible. One of my brothers gives me a really hard time about the fact that when I get really into something, a song or whatever, I listen to it over and over and over again. And that's true, but it's because not only do I end up loving the song and it actually changes my life to a degree, however small it is and however dramatic that sounds, to me that's actually true. A great song actually has a profound impact on my life. And the more that I listen to it, the more I start listening to different things about it. Eventually, while I'm still listening to the song, I start listening to how close the vocal sounds in the mix. I start listening to the guitars. Are they very mid-range soundy? Do they cut through the mix a little more? Are they a little darker sounding? I start listening to the bass line and what that's doing under it, what type of bass sound it is. Is it a higher kind of cutting through bass, or does it have all the top rolled off of it? I start listening to what the drummer is doing. I start listening to the reverbs that I might hear going on and how they affect the mix. And then I start being more curious even about that, the recording process of what went into it. I want to know what console was used to record a particular song or a particular record. I want to know what microphones were used. I want to know how that singer's voice was captured. Did they record him in the bathroom like Jim Morrison on LA Woman? Did they record him in a $8 million studio? I don't know if $8 million is a whole lot of money for a studio, but you get my point. I want to know what kind of amps were used. Were they Marshall amps? Were they Orange amps? Were they Fender amps? I want to know everything that I can possibly find out about what went into making that magic what it is. What went into making that record, that song, what it is. Who wrote the song? Who produced the song? And I feel this way both as a consumer and as an artist. As a consumer, I find that learning all this about a song or about a record or about an artist actually enriches the experience for me. It makes the experience deeper for me when I actually know what went into making it. Some people might feel differently. They might feel like finding all this stuff out kind of kills the mystery and sort of kills the magic for them, and I can understand that. But for me, it's just the opposite. And as an artist, I hope that learning all of that and understanding what went into creating that magic will help me to create a little bit of magic of my own. Okay, so that's what rock and roll means to me. The question now is, what does rock and roll mean to you? Why don't you let me know in the comments and we'll talk some rock and roll. Thank you very much for watching this video. Once again, I'm Röckët Stähr. If you want to hear how what I talked about in this video influences the music that I create, you can check me out on Spotify or iTunes or basically anywhere that you can get music these days. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for more videos in this series and for the videos that I make of my own songs. Till then, long live rock and roll!